Few documentary filmmakers have managed to explore the contradictions of modern life with the same mix of empathy, awkwardness, and quiet persistence as Louis Theroux. The guy has an ability to enter hostile or morally alien environments, and refusing to flinch has become his greatest strength. But few of his encounters have been as morally complex as his trilogy of films on the Westboro Baptist Church. Now, if you're interested, I have also covered Louis' encounters with Joe Exotic and the Tiger King crew, along with his controversial relationship with Jimmy Savile, so you should definitely go check those out if you haven't already. Also, my videos are now available on Spotify, so make sure to go follow me over there so you can listen to me on the go. And while you're here, you might as well subscribe to the channel, as I'm getting these videos out basically weekly now, or thereabouts. So, who is the Westboro Baptist Church? Well, the church was founded in 1955 by Fred Phelps, a firebrand preacher and disbarred civil rights attorney who led the congregation, which was composed almost entirely of his extended family. Based in Topeka, Kansas, the church originally began as a small offshoot of a mainstream Baptist theology, but soon devolved into an apocalyptic cult defined by one central conviction: that God's love and mercy was only reserved for them. Everyone else, including gay people, soldiers, politicians, Jews, Muslims, and even other Christians, were destined for eternal damnation. You see, Fred was a man of many contradictions. In his early life, he had fought racial segregation and represented African American clients in civil rights cases through his law firm. Yet by the 1990s, he had transformed into a prophet of hate, fixating on homosexuality as a symbol of moral decay. When the AIDS crisis erupted, Phelps and his followers began picketing at funerals of gay men, claiming that God was punishing America for tolerating sin. Their protests were deliberately cruel and calibrated for maximum media outrage. By the time Louis arrived in Topeka to shoot his first film, The Most Hated Family in America, in 2006, the Westboro Baptist Church was a household name in the US. Not because of the number of followers, but because of the insane amount of visibility they had, thanks to outrage caused through interviews and the early days of the internet. As Louis put it, they were a small church with a megaphone to the world. Going into the interview, Louis didn't go in with the intention to debunk them or necessarily expose them, but more to understand how intelligent people could sustain such venomous beliefs. The documentary opens with Louis visiting Shirley Phelps-Roper, Fred's daughter, fellow lawyer, and the church's de facto spokesperson. From the outset, Louis could sense that Shirley was articulate, quick-witted, and completely unflinching in the delivering of her message.
So don't try to pretend that you don't come under the umbrella of adultery just because you're a... Hi guys.
Hi. Louis then followed Shirley and the family to protest a soldier's funeral who had died in a roadside bombing in the Iraq War, where on the way, he questioned if getting in people's faces is actually more likely to put people off their message.
You thought about that just in terms of human psychology?
You think our job is to win souls to Christ. All we do, by getting in their face and putting these signs in front of them and these plain words, is make what was already in their heart come out of their mouth.
What do you really think?
This is what I really think.
Once they arrived at the funeral, Louis was relieved to see that they were forced to keep their distance. But it was the first time that Louis saw the public's reaction to their messaging in real time, up close, in person.
I mean, I've only been out here 25 minutes or so, but so far the reaction has been, I'd say, approximately 100% negative. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree.
Louis then met with two of Shirley's daughters, Megan and Becca, in their bedrooms, where he discovered that they had no friends and that everyone in their school hates them, despite them being nice to everyone.
You come on with like a lot of the stuff about the Bible, that some people might think you come off a tiny bit arrogant.
If they're offended by the judgments that we make according to God's standard, then that is a clear indication that they hate God's word, obviously, and that they're headed for hell.
Attending a church choir practice, Louis felt like he'd been bombarded with religious rhetoric and felt like it was getting in the way of getting to know the church members as people, particularly the girls. Louis could sense there was another side to their story and was curious to know more. As a result, the next day Louis would meet with Jill Phelps, who was the cousin of Megan and Becca, where she showed Louis a family picture which included many family members who'd defected.
Those people that have gone away, they're going to hell?
Yeah.
What if you don't believe in the Bible?
Well, then you're going to hell.
So I'm going to hell?
Yes, Louis, you are. You're going to hell.
You felt tempted?
I don't want to talk about that. I don't think it's appropriate. I'm not going to dwell on anything inappropriate, if I can possibly help it.
Later that afternoon, Louis had an appointment to meet with Steve Drain, a filmmaker who wasn't born into the group, but originally arrived at the church as a documentary maker, and even eventually moved his entire family from Florida to manage the church's online media and work closely with Fred, or who the church calls Gramps.
And are you glad you did that?
Absolutely. It's the only thing that I, at the end of the day, can say that I'm really, really glad that I did.
Is Gramps a disciple of God?
Anybody who has a sincere message, an ambassador from God, preaching a sincere message message of God is a prophet.
Steve then showed Louis how they make their signs, with Louis noticing the complete randomness of the figures they choose to include in the signage, with Steve arguing that any public figure that supports LGBT rights is fair game.
Did you feel this way about homosexuality before you came here?
No, of course not.
Why, what was your feeling?
I was the smartest man in the world. I embraced the philosophy of libertarianism. I was a genius.
With the freshly made signs, Louis followed Steve as he picketed on the sidewalks of Topeka, where Louis tried to understand what exactly Steve was protesting.
We're talking about callous defiance against God Almighty. The Jews killed Christ. You're going to try to say they worship the same God as I worship?
Newsflash, Brainiac, Christ was Jewish.
What I'm trying to tell you, Brainiac, is Christ was God.
That evening, Steve then invited Louis to a taping of one of the church's online sermons. It was here that Louis would come face to face with Pastor Phelps for the first time. After pleasantries had been exchanged, Louis began watching Fred deliver his speech. Once delivered, Louis questioned Fred, asking how many children he had, which was met with dismissal and then refusal of a full-length interview. Essentially, Louis' plan was to find out how many children Fred would say he had, baiting to see if he would acknowledge his children who had left the church. Curious as to find out why Fred wouldn't answer his question, Steve replied,
You already knew how many children he had.
Yeah, but I wanted to know how many he would say that he had, because I know that he had 13, but that 4 have fallen away.
You know that he has 13 and that 4 have fallen away.
But I was looking for, I wanted to hear what he had to say about it.
He told you what he had to say on it. You want us to say it a certain way?
The next day, Louis joined Shirley for the afternoon school run, where he wanted to find out more about how their impregnable beliefs are instilled in the children. Initially, Louis was surprised to find out that the children went to public schools. However, Shirley pointed out 2 major reasons why they can't be homeschooled. Firstly, because she believes she couldn't do a good enough job, and secondly, the face of the children need to be in the community because it was part of their testimony. When Louis asked Shirley if the kids had any friends, she said that they may have friendly acquaintances, but not friends.
Where would that go? Pretty quick, you're going to get into the discussions. On the other hand, that's how I met my husband. He hung out with my brother.
Sounds like you haven't made up your own mind.
When they turn up, when they come around, they're welcome. I would not have my kids calling themselves dating anyone or doing any activities that would remotely resemble what this generation calls dating. What would be the purpose? So they can fornicate?
Fun.
Fun?
That afternoon, Louis followed the family to a picket outside a hardware store, which they chose because it sold Swedish vacuum cleaners, which in their mind was enough of a target because apparently Swedish authorities had imprisoned a local pastor for preaching against homosexuality, which was enough to make the whole nation a target. But during this picket, Louis wanted to question some of the younger members to see if they actually understood what they were protesting, where, of course, they had no idea and just spouted gibberish. The next morning, Louis met with Megan Phelps, who is studying at the local university, hoping to follow in the family tradition of becoming a lawyer. On the way to class, the pair discussed a whole number of things, including Louis having a child out of wedlock, and how Megan believed that meant Louis deserved to go to hell. Over the next few days, Louis spent more and more time with the family, and felt like he was building a bond, and noticed how because they were outcast from most of society, it actually strengthened their bond within their families. Slowly, especially with the girls, he began to see more of their humanity reveal itself, and also noted how easy it was to get desensitized to their message. However, the reality of what they were preaching hit home when one of the kids got hit by a drive-by milkshake. A little later, Louis went to his first service hosted by Fred, which left Louis somewhat flabbergasted. Afterwards, he was granted a 5-minute interview in which he asked Fred about his preaching.
I don't know how to deal with a question like that. You're just too dumb. Sorry.
You regard the Westboro Baptist Church as the only church that's giving biblical preaching according to the Word of God?
Is this 3 minutes up?
As part of the church's effort to expand its message to every corner of America, it decided to picket a funeral of a soldier several hundred miles away on the outskirts of Chicago, leading Louis to follow along. It was on the flight where Louis discovered the church spends over $200,000 a year on plane tickets. However, when en route to the funeral, niceties were put to one side when Louis questioned Shirley's reasoning for protesting the funeral.
But isn't it possible
You can see with your eyes that it is.
This funeral is for a good man and a righteous and a nice person who doesn't deserve to have his funeral picketed.
Not a chance, poopy pants.
Away from Westboro, Louis watched as the family of the soldier entered the church, once again reminding him how painful these protests were to the soldier's family. Back in Topeka, Louis went and spoke with Steve one last time, where it ultimately led to a confrontation between the two.
And do you rejoice when soldiers die in Iraq?
Absolutely I do.
And do you rejoice when people are knocked over by cars and they get cancer?
Absolutely. I love it. And I can tell you right now, because
There
it's
you
the
go.
righteous judgment of God Almighty.
In an interview a few days before the film came out, Louis Louis was asked if he thought he came to an answer, stating, "Yes, I think we do. I think that pastor is not a very nice person. I think he's an angry person who's twisted the Bible and picked and chosen verses that support his anger, that sort of justify his anger, and he's instilled that in his children and they've passed it on to their children. Although the second and third generation are by and large quite nice people from what I saw, they still live under the influence of their grams." I think another part of the answer is that parts of the Christian Bible are pretty weird. There's a lot of weird stuff in there, and when you take that and you add angry, domineering kind of father figure, which is Gramps, and you sort of add that he has sort of separated them from other people, other families, and driven them to achieve a lot, and he was kind of a charismatic guy, and still is to a point. He's very verbal, very persuasive, and extremely compelling speaker. All these things added together combine to make a powerful influence. The film aired on the 1st of April 2007, and became one of Louis Theroux's most watched documentaries. In response to the film, the WBC claimed that they appreciated the attention they received because of the film, with Shirley adding a citation on their website stating that the only regret about the documentary was that it was called The Most Hated Family in America, and not The Most Hated Family in the World. On the 8th of April, a week after the documentary came out, Fred Phelps preached a sermon addressing Louis directly and personally, accusing Theroux of taking cheap, unfair advantage of the young women of the church, and trying to embarrass them about their chastity. In 2010, 4 years after his first documentary, Louis decided to return to the church in a film called America's Most Hated Family in Crisis. Louis was returning in the wake of a number of high-profile defections, with the film hinting at an impending collapse. From the outset, it was pretty obvious that Shirley and the church are more vocal and determined than ever, despite her kids Josh and Libby leaving the church.
A lot of people leaving.
We have had a lot of that. It's like freaking Exodus out of here. It's like, but it's really good. So if you've got a rebel who wants to do this and that, then they're always dragging their ass. So you get rid of one of those and it's a lighter, you're unburdened.
Louis then interviewed some of the kids he originally met in 2006, who are now 11 years old, who said that in the wake of the defections, they also feared the temptation of leaving the church. Louis then interviewed Steve Drain, whose daughter Lauren had now defected. When Louis got to his house, he revealed that the next sign he was going to make was an image of Louis's head with Louis in hell. After this, Louis addressed the elephant in the room of Steve's daughter Lauren's defection and how they're happy to see the back of her.
Oh, since I was last here, you lost a member of the family.
I did. Yeah, Lauren left. Why are you sorry to hear that?
I'm sorry for her because I know she's upset and I've spoken to her. Sorry for you because she was your daughter, is your daughter, and I know that you were very fond of her.
Once somebody comes to years and they decide that they would rather enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season rather than suffer afflictions with the people of God, we say bye.
That whole situation to date with Lauren happened for his glory to magnify his name. Why are you back here, Louis?
After a fiery exchange with Lauren's parents, Louis went to visit her and find out how her defection had affected her relationship with her family and how Steve got caught up within the church. However, she ultimately expressed her relief at finally being free from the church's control. The following day, Louis went to a picket, where the members were now met with waves of students and parents protesting them. Shirley had even got creative with her songs, adapting Lady Gaga's Telephone and Queen's Fat Bottom Girls with homophobic and anti-Semitic lyrics. Inside the compound, Fred Phelps, who is now in his 80s, appeared increasingly frail. Once a booming presence at every protest, he had retreated into the background, with his leadership becoming increasingly more symbolic. This led Louis to sense that there was a power vacuum forming, and that the next generation, especially Shirley's children, seemed caught between loyalty to the family and the dawning realization that the world is not as black and white as they were taught. During the church's service, Louis was asked to sit at the back alongside Jack, who was aiming to become a new member of the group.
Are you part of the church? No.
Not a member.
Do you aim to become a member?
I hope, yes. I mean, if you're not a member of the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ, then you're probably going to hell.
If you thought that coming here right off the streets of San Francisco and landing here the next day and say, I want to be a member, we wouldn't do that because we didn't know you.
After this, Louis went to watch a performance from the Saucy Seven, a dance group made up of the young women of the church, where afterwards, Louis got to interview Zhao Phelps, who spoke to Louis once again 4 years later. Louis was interested to find out if Zhao still seemed like she had conflict within her, especially after her best friend Lauren had defected.
Were you sad to see your friend go?
She wasn't my friend.
Well, she had been until that point.
She had, but you see the about face that she did, and everything that I thought she wasn't that person.
Yeah, but it can't be easy to reset your whole thinking about a person overnight.
She was a liar, hun.
Louis then went to interview Libby's parents, who refused to admit feelings or show any emotion about the fact that their daughter had defected, which left a weird energy in the air of a couple unwilling or unable to process what had happen. Louis then found out that because the kids aren't allowed to have friends outside their family, that some of the kids had created a loophole. You see, members of the church are allowed to have contact with journalists and interviewers. So some of the kids have been keeping in touch with a Dutch film crew, who they exchange gifts with.
Film crew that came is actually part of a student project, and so we've kept up with them. We see, on Twitter, we talk to them on Twitter sometimes, and they ask, they have a lot of questions. And see, that's the thing. When we interact with people on these levels, they know who we are and they know how we live our lives. And the fact that they see that we can live in this earth and do all the things that they do, not all the things, but a lot of the same things that they do, and still have this public testimony, it's a testimony against them.
Towards the end, Louis had one more conversation with Shirley where she talked about her daughters who had left the church.
They have walked away and they have crucified the Son of God afresh and laid him to an open shame. Before I would go comfort any of those rebels in their sins, I would first have to, what would I be saying to my children?
Do you think you'll lose more of your kids?
I don't know. I always keep my eyes open and watch my children.
The emotional highlight of the film comes when Louis speaks with Megan Phelps. Still thoughtful and articulate as the last time he met her, she seemed conflicted. She defended the church's message, but emitted moments of doubt. Unbeknownst to viewers at the time, those seeds of doubt would later bloom into one of the most dramatic departures in the church's history. But for now, Louis left Topeka with a sense of melancholy. The church wasn't collapsing just yet, but the foundations were shaking. During this time, the church also had a Supreme Court ruling looming over their heads at the time. You see, in 2006, the church protested a funeral of a soldier, which led to the father of the soldier to sue the church for intentional infliction of emotional distress. A jury initially awarded him $10.9 million. However, the verdict was overturned, ruling that the speech was protected under the First Amendment, resulting in the US Supreme Court ruling to uphold the decision in an 8-1 ruling. In 2012, shortly after the release of Louis' documentary, both Grace and Megan left the church, making 4 of Shirley's children that had left. In an interview with The Guardian, Megan recalled leaving the church. Leaving was unbearably sad, having dinner with my grandparents or bouncing on the trampoline with my brother for one last time, asking my parents about their history in detail because I knew I'd never be able to ask them about it again. I was consciously saying goodbye to my family while they had no idea. I was trying to keep as much of it as I could. On the day, my sister and I sat down with my parents after they heard that we planned to leave. They were really upset and my mum was so broken by the news. I'd never seen her face like that before. We told them we didn't believe anymore. Then we went to pack. The adrenaline pumping through me made my hands shake as I stuffed things into my bag. Word spread among the family and several of my aunts and uncles turned up to talk us out of it. It started with, "You know better than this," and spiraled into shouting as we left. I went back the next day to pick up the rest of my stuff and knocked on the front door of the house I grew up in for the first time. The cold was immediate. I knew straight away that I wasn't part of the church anymore. I was out. I missed my family every single day. In 2013, Megan and Grace publicly confirmed their departure from the church in an open letter and a blog post called Head Full of Doubt, Road Full of Promise, stating, "We know that we've done and we've said things that hurt people. Inflicting pain on others wasn't the goal, but it was one of the outcomes. We wish it weren't so, and regret that hurt. We know that we dearly love our family. They now consider us betrayers, and we are now cut off from their lives. But we know they are well intentioned. We have never not loved them. We know that we can't undo our whole lives. We can't even say we want to if we could. We are who we are because of all the experiences that have brought us to this point. What we can do is trying to find a better way to live our life from here on. That's our focus." In 2016, Louis went on the Joe Rogan Experience, where he spoke about how treating people with kindness and respect disarms any kind of extreme religious beliefs.
From doing other stories about extreme religious beliefs like the Westboro Baptist Church, I know from people who I met who were in the church when I made my documentary and then subsequently left, that what short circuits their beliefs, what allows them to see something bigger than what they're in, is when you treat them with kindness,
yes.
And instead of shouting back at them or hurling abuse back, which just reinforces their view of you as an enemy of God or suppressive or however they characterize it, if you actually behave decently and attempt to robustly present your position but in a respectful way and with a kind of coming from a place of caring and empathy as opposed to sort of censorious or hostile attitude, that actually can be much more effective.
Absolutely.
As well as being humane.
Kudos to you, sir.
After leaving, Megan began advocating for empathy and open conversation. Her TED Talk in 2017, I Grew Up in the Westboro Baptist Church, Here's Why I Left, reached millions of viewers and framed her as one of the most prominent defectors from the group.
Hide from the judgment of my family, who I knew would never speak to me again, people whose thoughts and opinions had meant everything to me, and I wanted to hide from the world I'd rejected for so long, people who had no reason at all to give me a second chance after a lifetime of antagonism. And yet, unbelievably, they did. The world had access to my past because it was all over the internet, thousands of tweets and hundreds of interviews, everything from local TV news to the Howard Stern show, but so many embraced me with open arms anyway. I wrote an apology for the harm I'd caused, but I also knew that an apology could never undo any of it. All I could do was try to build a new life and find a way somehow to repair some of the damage.
Fred Phelps, the founder of the WBC, died on the 19th of March 2014, at the age of 84. His death basically marked as a turning point for the church. In the months leading up to his death, multiple sources, including his estranged son, Nate Phelps, and later Megan, claimed that Fred had been excommunicated or voted out of his own church. Louis described this moment as symbolic of the church's moral unraveling. The man who built the movement on condemnation died condemned by his own followers. It was almost Shakespearean. After his death, the leadership of the church passed to a council of 7 male elders who become the key ideological enforcers. But this basically created a power vacuum within the church and accelerated the slow decline that Louis had sensed years earlier. This made it irresistible for Louis to return one last time. In 2018, 9 years after Louis' last documentary, Louis returned with Surviving America's Most Hated Family. The film opens up with the church picketing a college basketball game, where Louis was once again faced with the realities of the message they are pushing and how the young children who had grown up within the church were now young adults, who had become just as spirited in their beliefs as their elders. Not only that, a new family, the Jakes, had joined the church moving from Florida 4 years prior, which caused the mother of the family to divorce the dad. But what was surprising was the teenagers of the family seemed just as vocal as the kids who had grown up in the church all their lives. When Louis asked the kid if he missed his mum, he said that she hates him because she doesn't tell him the truth, but it was obvious to see that there was conflict on his face. Louis then met with Steve Drain once again, who is now one of the elders. In the media room of the church delivering his message, Louis noticed how the language Steve was using was way less intense and more reasonable than the language Fred would have ever used.
It's not so reasonable compared with the rhetoric the way it used to be. You're more liable to remind people of the route to salvation.
You're either the quickest study in the history of man, or you already kind of came here with what you thought this was.
It's based on what I'm seeing, really, and I don't mean it as a criticism. It feels like a softening or a declination from how maybe Gramps would have spoken it.
I think that it has more to do with growth and maturity than anything else.
Louis met with Jal Phelps once again, who was now married to a British man from Bradford who had seen Louis' original documentary, was impressed with their messaging, and decided to visit Kansas. Matt, who was a former postal worker, now had a whole family with Jal, and believed that he left the UK because he felt like the UK is a divided society.
Feelings, Mr. Louis. What good are feelings in front of the judgment seat of Christ?
In the wake of Pastor Fred's death, sources had told Louis that a few days before his death, that Fred had a change of heart, telling a gay couple who lived opposite that they were good people. Louis then met with Shirley, where they discussed that she now had 3 children who had left.
You got 7 left.
Yes.
That must have been very painful.
Like life. It's all painful.
You know I've been in touch with Megan.
Well, I assumed you had.
Yeah. You know she's married and has a daughter now.
Yes, I know that.
Who I'm assuming you haven't met.
No, I have not.
Louis then asked about the death of Gramps, and asked whether they picketed his funeral.
Did you picket Gramps' funeral?
He went from dead to the ground as fast as we could possibly get him there, in a place where no one will be able to find him.
Did he fear God and obey his commandments at the end?
Look, I don't know.
The fact that you won't confirm it doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
And I'm not going to...
The fact that you make the claim doesn't mean that it happened either.
But I know it happened.
Okay.
Louis then met with Megan, who had now become one of the most high-profile defectors. She was now married to a man that she had met online while still being in the church.
Over time, it became this community for me. And I started to care about what they thought. You know, I started to care about how they felt. And then once that thread started to unravel, I couldn't unsee it.
Louis then interviewed Megan's sister Becca, where he referenced Megan's newly released book, which suggested that Shirley had been pushed to the side by the elders. But just as she was getting emotional, one of the elders pushed back against Louis, where Louis then confronted him for talking for her. After this, Louis then went to a church service where he met a newcomer who had also seen Louis' 2 previous documentaries, and admitted it got him interested in the church. He then revealed that he himself was pansexual, despite his beliefs, making him basically celibate.
I've seen both of your previous documentaries, and actually I wanted to thank you for that, because I was able to come to my current position in relation to the Westboro Baptist Church as a result partly of watching those 2 documentaries that you did, which is I am about 90% on the same page with Westboro's doctrine.
I made those programs from a humanistic perspective as a way of showing how poisonous and hateful practices had grown out of a certain kind of religious practice. You didn't see that I was attempting to elicit.
I saw what you were attempting to do. Yeah, I did see that.
By this point, Louis had well and truly seen how the intensity of the preaching had mellowed out, and the language used was completely different. Louis then went to meet Fred's niece, who was now very much out of the church, and was there when Fred died. Curious to know more about her perspective, he also asked if she thought there might be a collapse of the church.
Maybe. I can't expect it, but I do have some hope that something will trigger this complete unravel of it. You know, every kingdom falls. It's bound to happen eventually, but I don't want to sit around and wait for it to happen.
Louis had one final meeting with Shirley, where Louis discussed her 3 children defecting and Fred being left out of favour at the church. The interview, unlike previous meetings, saw Shirley as fragile and incredibly emotional as she recounted the loss of her children.
They were my children. Everything that I had was theirs. Everything that I know was theirs. We treated them well, but we don't control the heart. We don't own salvation. We can't do anything about that. So we go with the wisdom of God on all of these matters. It doesn't change the fact it's sad and painful.
Towards the end of the documentary, Megan decided to return to Topeka to deliver a card for her dad's birthday and visit some fellow defectors where Louis rode along. Louis told Megan that her sister Becca was now engaged to a new member of the church. When Louis broke the news to Megan, she seemed devastated, as it now meant that it would become a lot harder for her siblings to leave the church. On the 20th of October 2020, Louis was interviewed about his experience with the church and the impact they had on him.
When you're among them, and I'd been there 2 weeks by that time, you do get desensitized, and it's really striking how a kind of Stockholm syndrome sets in. That you start to see a sort of likable side, and and it puts you in that difficult space of starting to like someone who represents an abhorrent belief system. I was conscious that it felt a bit of a leap that we're putting all our chips on one little spot, and that we were going to say we're going to film for 3 weeks in this one Christian group, and what if they don't turn out to be that interesting? I was conscious of wanting to do more serious stories. I mean, I've always had a slight weakness for wanting to be a sort of foreign correspondent in a slightly embarrassing way, so I always thought, oh, I should be out in Iraq in a tank. That's what real real documentary makers would be, in the Congo or somewhere like that. And there was well, you're going to go and meet a wacky cult in Kansas. It's like, okay then. But actually, it is quite a deep piece. In what makes it work, among other things, is that they knew that I thought they were fruitcakes, but they knew that I didn't agree with what they represented, and they really didn't care. And so there's this real honesty to the relationship. I've never felt so relaxed, and this is it was one of the most pleasant filming experiences I've had. You just you're right in the middle of something just that for me felt fascinating, strange, but you're in this sort of neutral zone where, even though they regard you as a hell-bound sinner, they're being quite nice to you, and you've got some sort of diplomatic immunity where they made us dinner on 1 or 2 occasions, and I remember being on a car, and our sound recordist suddenly became aware he could still hear them on his headphones because they were mic'd, and Noah, that little guy, he was saying, will Louis still be around next week? And Shirley, his mom, was like, no, hon, he's going back to London. Well, can we stay in touch and be friends? And she's like, no, hon, it's very sad, but Louis is going to hell.
In October 2024, Steve Drain, the filmmaker and elder of the church, released a full 97-minute documentary on his YouTube channel announcing that he had left the church and apologized for his behavior while he was a WBC member.
In most ways, there's really no reason for anyone to even know that I exist. Yet in some circles, I became looked upon as one of the most hated people alive in my time, an ignoble distinction that now brings me much shame and sorrow for reasons I'll get to shortly. As a young filmmaker back in 1999, I was granted unfettered access to interview and tag along with the leader of the most notorious religious group in America, Fred Phelps of the Westboro Baptist Church. The documentary film that came from all that, Hate Mongers, began a 20-plus year personal odyssey that has culminated in, amongst other things, the making of the film that you're now watching.
One commenter stated, "It's time for Louis to go back. So many defectors popping up. We need the tea." Today, Shirley Phelps-Roper still practices law for the family firm and has 5 children left within the church, alongside her extended family. However, on the 16th of June 2025, Megan posted to Instagram with a photo of her and her baby brother Lou. She announced that Luke had left the church and that this was the first time that she had seen him since he was 10 years old. Today, the church is apparently much smaller than the peak days of membership, but over the course of nearly 2 decades, Louis' trilogy on the church became much more than a set of documentaries. It became the story of change. Louis was never there to argue or humiliate. He went in trying to understand. He didn't fight hate with hate, he fought with curiosity, awkwardness, and a quiet kind of empathy that slowly disarmed even the most stubborn believers. Anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching this video. It really does mean a lot to me. If you want to listen to me on the go, all of my videos are now available on Spotify, so make sure to go follow me over there, as well as follow me on Instagram at PhatMema. And you might as well like this video, subscribe, and comment below what you want to see next. As always, I'll see you in the next one.